The lawyer's office smelled like old paper and expensive cologne. I sat in a burgundy leather chair that sighed when I settled into it. My hands folded in my lap the way Mother had taught me 50 years ago. Proper ladies keep their hands still, Helen. Nobody trusts a fidgeter. I'm Helen Morrison. Well, Helen Bradford now, I suppose. Though the divorce papers had only been final for 3 months and the name still felt like borrowed shoes. 56 years old, and I was learning to be just Helen again, not Mrs. Morrison, not anyone's mother or wife, just me. The attorney, Marcus Wellington III, had kind eyes behind tortoiseshell glasses. He'd handled Mother's estate after she passed 6 months ago at 91. Sharp-minded until the very end, sharp-tongued too. Ms. Bradford, he corrected himself, glancing at his notes. Your mother's will was quite specific about the distribution of her assets. I nodded, expecting the usual. The house in the historic district would go to my brother Thomas. The investment portfolio divided equally. Perhaps some jewelry for my daughters. What I wasn't expecting was the wooden recipe box. Marcus slid it across the mahogany desk. It was cedar, worn smooth by decades of handling, with brass hinges that had tarnished to a soft green. On the lid, Mother's initials were carved in elegant script. Ebum Eleanor Blake Mansfield. She left instructions that this specifically goes to you, Marcus said, along with this letter. The envelope was cream-colored, Mother's stationery, the good kind she reserved for thank you, notes to the country club ladies, and correspondence with the mayor's wife. My name was written in her careful Palmer method cursive, each loop and flourish precise. I took both items, the recipe box heavier than I expected. There's one more thing, Marcus said, his voice shifting in a way that made me look up. She left you the building on Sullivan Street, the commercial property she's owned for 40 years. My breath caught. The restaurant space? Yes, currently leased to that Italian place. Belavia's. The lease expires in 3 months, and according to her instructions, you're not to renew it. The property is yours to do with as you see fit. I drove back to my rental apartment, a temporary situation while the family home sold. While I figured out what came next with the recipe box beside me on the passenger seat. Through the window, Charleston looked impossibly beautiful in late October, the kind of golden afternoon that made tourists fall in love with the South. But all I could see was that box, sitting there like a question I didn't know how to answer. My apartment was small, just a 1-bedroom above a bookstore in the French Quarter. Nothing like the 6-bedroom colonial I'd maintained for 3 decades, where I'd hosted Thanksgiving for 25 people, where I'd raised 3 children, where my husband had eventually confessed he'd been in love with his paralegal for 7 years. The divorce had been civilized. Too civilized, maybe. Richard kept the retirement accounts. I kept my dignity. The kids, all grown, scattered across different states, had been supportive in that distant way adult children are when they have their own lives to manage. I set the recipe box on my small kitchen table, made myself tea, and finally opened Mother's letter. Dearest Helen, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and you're likely sitting somewhere trying to understand why I left you that box, instead of leaving it to gather dust in my pantry where it's sat for 40 years. The recipes inside aren't just food instructions. They're the map of my life, the one I never showed you, the one I abandoned when I became Mrs. Edward Mansfield and dedicated myself to being Charleston's most proper lady. Before I met your father, I wanted to be a chef, not a housewife who hosted dinner parties, but a real chef. I'd saved money from working at my uncle's restaurant, enough to lease that property on Sullivan Street. I was 24 years old and terrified and more alive than I'd ever been. I ran Eleanor's for exactly 18 months. Not successful by most standards, but mine. Every recipe in that box was created in that kitchen. Every dish a piece of my soul served on borrowed china. Then I met your father. He was handsome, established, from a good family. He made it clear that wives of prominent attorneys didn't work. Certainly didn't cook professionally. I closed the restaurant, became the woman he needed, and told myself I'd made the right choice. For 67 years, I've lived with that choice. I was a good wife, a good mother, A good Charleston lady. I kept that recipe box hidden. Took it out sometimes late at night to remember who I might have been. I see you making the same mistake. Helen, 56 years old, newly divorced, and already talking about settling into retirement, about finding a nice volunteer position, about being content with less. I'm leaving you that building because you need to know something. I learned too late. It's never too late to become who you might have been. The recipes are yours. The building is yours. What you do with them is yours. Cook, Helen, cook like I never had the courage to. With love and regret. Mother. I read the letter 3 times, my tea growing cold. Mother had wanted to be a chef. In all my 56 years, through countless formal dinners where she orchestrated perfection with military precision, through holidays where her table settings appeared in the society pages, I'd never known. She'd never told me. I opened the recipe box with trembling hands. Inside were hundreds of index cards, handwritten in Mother's younger script, looser, more enthusiastic than the controlled cursive I'd known. Each card was detailed, precise, but with notes scrawled in the margins. Mrs. Hendricks ordered this 3 times in 1 week. Edward said it wasn't appropriate for a wife to smell like garlic. This one made people smile. The recipes ranged from classic low-country dishes, reimagined with unexpected twists, to ambitious French preparations I couldn't imagine Mother attempting. In her pristine showpiece kitchen, at the bottom of the box, underneath all the cards, was a small leather journal. Inside, in Mother's handwriting, opening night at Eleanor's, August 15, 1956. 12 customers. 7 sent compliments to the chef. I've never been happier. September 1956, hired my first employee, a dishwasher named James who reminds me of my brother. He says I have the gift. December 1956, Edward proposed. Mother says this is the answer to her prayers. Father says Edward will take care of me properly. I said yes. But when I looked at the restaurant lease papers, I cried for an hour. February 1957, closed Eleanor's today. Edward says it's for the best, that I'll have a more important role as his wife. I packed every recipe card, told myself maybe someday when the children are grown. The entries stopped there. The rest of the journal was empty pages, a future never written. I sat at my small kitchen table as twilight turned to darkness, reading recipes and journal entries, discovering a mother I'd never known existed. The Eleanor who had dreamed of feeding people, who'd fought to carve out space in a world that told her to be smaller, quieter, more appropriate. The Eleanor who'd given up and spent 67 years wondering, what if? My phone buzzed. A text from my daughter Caroline, called the realtor. She thinks the house will sell quickly. Where are you planning to move? I looked at the recipe box, at the letter, at the journal full of blank pages. Still deciding, I typed back. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Mother at 24, leasing that Sullivan Street property, betting on herself. About Mother at 91, leaving me a map back to possibility. About myself at 56, newly divorced, supposedly beginning the next chapter, which everyone seemed to assume meant quiet retirement, grandchildren babysitting, maybe a book club. But Mother's letter echoed in my mind. It's never too late to become who you might have been. At a.m., I got up, turned on every light in my small kitchen, and pulled out the first recipe card. She crab soup, Eleanor's original recipe. I didn't have all the ingredients. My temporary kitchen was barely stocked with more than coffee and cereal. But I could read the recipe, could trace Mother's handwriting, could see her note in the margin. The secret is patience. You can't rush what needs to become. The next morning, I drove to Sullivan Street. Bolavia's occupied the space during evening hours, but mornings it sat empty. I had the key Marcus had given me, and technically it was my property now. The building was narrow, brick, with high ceilings and original tin tiles that someone had painted over decades ago. The front held 6 tables. The back a commercial kitchen that looked both industrial and tired. But the bones were good. The light through the tall windows was beautiful. The location, just off King Street in a neighborhood experiencing Renaissance, was perfect. I stood in the center of that empty dining room, and for the first time in months, maybe years, I felt something other than numbness or resignation. I felt possibility. My phone rang. Richard, my ex-husband. We were cordial now, the kind of distant politeness that comes after you've spent 32 years together and have nothing left to say. Helen, I heard about your mother's will, that property on Sullivan Street. What about it? I know a commercial broker. You could probably get a good price. With your divorce settlement and the house sale, you'd be quite comfortable. Retire properly. Retire properly. As if 56 meant the finish line. Thank you, Richard, but I'm considering other options. Options? He sounded genuinely confused. Helen, you've never worked in your life. The words landed like they were meant to. A statement of fact. A gentle reminder of my place. That's true, I said quietly. I've never worked. I've only served. I hung up before he could respond. That afternoon, I made my first call. Not to a real estate broker, but to a small business attorney. Not to plan retirement, but to plan resurrection. I want to open a restaurant, I told her, and I need to know what I'm getting myself into. Mother had left me recipes, a building, and one blank journal waiting to be filled with a different ending. At 56, I was finally ready to write it. The first thing I learned was that I didn't actually know how to cook, not really. Oh, I could follow recipes well enough. 32 years of dinner parties and holiday gatherings had taught me precision, timing, presentation. I knew which fork went where and how to keep conversation flowing while checking on 5 dishes simultaneously. But Mother's recipes required something different. They required understanding. You can't just make she crab soup, I muttered to myself in my small apartment kitchen, staring at the index card. You have to become it. Mother's note in the margin. Watch the roux. It tells you when it's ready. I'd made roux before. Butter, flour, heat. Simple. Except when I tried, it burned. Then it was too pale. Then it was lumpy. I tried again and again. By the 4th attempt at PM on a Tuesday, standing in my cramped kitchen, with my feet aching and my hair falling out of its proper clip, I finally understood what Mother meant. The roux did tell you when it was ready. You just had to stop trying to control it and start listening. That night, I made she crab soup that tasted like memory and salt air and something I couldn't quite name. I sat at my small table and cried into my bowl, not from sadness, but from recognition. This was what Mother had felt. This small, fierce joy of creating something that fed more than hunger. I called my daughter Caroline the next morning. Mom, are you okay? You sound different. I'm learning to cook, I said. You know how to cook. You've been cooking for decades. No, honey, I've been executing for decades. There's a difference. Silence on the other end then. Is this about Grandma's will? The recipe box? Partly. Mom, you're not seriously thinking about opening a restaurant? The question carried weight, concern, skepticism, maybe fear that her mother was having some kind of breakdown. I don't know yet, I said honestly, but I'm thinking about something. That weekend, my brother Thomas came by. Helen, I'm worried about you, he said, sitting on my small sofa, looking uncomfortable in the scaled-down space. Living in this apartment, spending your nights making soup. This isn't like you. How do you know what I'm like? I asked, surprised by my own directness. I don't even know what I'm like. He blinked. You're being dramatic. This is about the divorce. Give yourself time to heal, then make decisions. I'm 56, Thomas. How much more time do I need to wait before I'm allowed to want something? He left looking troubled, making me promise to think carefully before doing anything rash. That night, I cooked again. Mother's recipe for Hoppin' John, reinvented with unexpected spices. The card said, "Tradition is just yesterday's innovation that worked." I took a photo of the finished dish and sent it to Mother's attorney, Marcus Wellington. His response came minutes later. Eleanor would be proud. Have you decided about the building? I stared at the message for a long time before typing. I'm deciding. Sullivan Street in November morning light looked like a painting of possibility. I'd met with the current tenants at Bellavia's the week before. Mario Bellavita, third-generation restaurateur, had been gracious about the non-renewal of his lease. "I understand," he'd said, though his eyes showed worry. "My grandchildren want me to retire anyway. Maybe this is God's timing. I'm not trying to push you out," I'd said. "If you want to renew." No, your mother and I spoke before she passed. She told me she had plans for this place. Plans that needed to start fresh. Now the space was empty except for the commercial kitchen equipment. Mario had agreed to sell me at cost. I'd spent 2 weeks scrubbing, painting, dreaming. My daughters came to see it. Caroline flew in from Atlanta, bringing my granddaughter Emma, who was 13 and skeptical about everything. My younger daughter, Rebecca, drove down from Durham, 7 months pregnant and clearly concerned. "Mom, this is a lot," Caroline said, standing in the middle of the dining room. "Starting a restaurant at your age." "At my age?" I repeated. "I'm 56, not 90. I didn't mean she hesitated. "I just mean, this is a huge financial risk. You've never run a business. Your grandmother ran this space for 18 months when she was 24. She made it work. And then she closed it," Rebecca pointed out gently. "Mom, Grandma had her reasons. This industry is brutal. The failure rate." "I know the statistics," I said. "I've done research." What I hadn't said to them, I'd also spent weeks testing recipes, consulting with a business advisor, creating spreadsheets that would have impressed my former self. The proper Charleston lady who'd managed household accounts with precision was now applying those skills to something entirely her own. Emma, my granddaughter, had been quiet, walking around the space, touching the walls, looking at the kitchen. "Grandma," she said finally, "can I help?" I looked at this 13-year-old, standing in my nearly empty restaurant with her grandmother's eyes and her great-grandmother's directness. "Help how?" "I don't know. Whatever you need. Mom says you're crazy for doing this, but I think it's cool." Caroline started to object, but I raised my hand. "Emma, I would love your help. Do you know anything about social media?" She laughed. "Grandma, I'm 13. It's basically my native language." That night, after my daughters left still worried but slightly reassured by my clearly researched plans, Emma and I sat on the floor of the empty restaurant with Chinese takeout and her laptop. "What should we call it?" she asked. I'd been thinking about this for weeks. Every name felt too much or too little, too pretentious or too modest. "Eleanor's," I said finally. "We're calling it Eleanor's." Emma typed it into a search engine. "Eleanor's Charleston." I love it. Classic but not old. Traditional but not boring. "Like your great-grandmother," I said. "Like you," Emma corrected, and something in my chest cracked open. December in Charleston is unpredictable, some days warm enough for shirt sleeves, others requiring coats. I spent those weeks testing recipes in the restaurant kitchen, learning the equipment, failing often. My small business advisor, Patricia Chen, had been blunt. "You need a menu that's coherent but distinct. 25 items maximum. Focus on execution over variety." So I cooked, and cooked, and cooked. Every recipe from Mother's box I tested multiple times. Some were brilliant: her low-country bouillabaisse with unexpected fennel, her shrimp and grits reimagined with smoked paprika, her pecan-crusted catfish. That made me understand why people had kept coming back to her restaurant. Others were disasters. A lamb dish that was too ambitious, a dessert that wouldn't set, experiments that proved even Mother had failed sometimes. I documented everything in the leather journal she'd left blank, creating my own record. December 3rd, her oyster recipe works. Needs fresh herbs, but the base is perfect. December 10th, the duck failed spectacularly. Maybe some recipes should stay in 1956. December 15th, today I burned my hand on a pan, cried for 20 minutes, then finished the dish anyway. It was delicious. I hired my first employee in early January, James Mitchell, a retired line cook, who'd worked at some of Charleston's finest restaurants. Before health issues forced him to slow down. "I can't do full-time anymore," he said at the interview. "Bad knees, worse back. But I can teach, and I can help you avoid the mistakes I've seen 100 new restaurants make." "I'm not young," I admitted. "Everyone keeps reminding me of that." He laughed, a warm sound that filled the empty dining room. Mrs. Bradford, I'm 72. Let's not talk about age. Let's talk about whether you can actually cook. I made him mother's she crab soup, hands shaking slightly as I presented the bowl. James tasted it slowly, thoughtfully, set down his spoon, looked at me with serious eyes. This is very good, he said. Not perfect, your roux is a quarter shade too dark. And you've oversalted by just a pinch, but it's got soul. That's rarer than perfection. I hired him on the spot. Together, we refined the menu, James teaching me techniques mother had learned instinctively, me bringing her recipes into the present while honoring their past. Your mother had real talent, James said one afternoon, reviewing her cards. These flavor combinations, she was ahead of her time. If she'd kept going, she couldn't, I said. Different era, different expectations. But you can, he pointed out. I'm trying, I said. I'm 56 and terrified and trying. James smiled. Good, the ones who aren't terrified usually fail. By late January, we had a menu, 15 carefully chosen dishes, each one rooted in mother's original recipes but updated, refined, ready. Patricia, my business advisor, reviewed our numbers. You need to open by March, she said. April at latest. You've got enough runway for 3 months, maybe 4. After that, I'd either succeed or join the statistics of failed restaurants. I chose not to think about that. February brought unexpected challenges. The health inspector found issues with my ventilation system. $8,000 to repair. Money I hadn't budgeted. My liquor license application stalled in bureaucratic limbo. The interior designer I'd hired to freshen up the space wanted to gut everything, adding another $30,000 I didn't have. I fired her and painted the dining room myself, choosing colors from mother's era, soft greens and creams that felt both classic and timeless. Emma came every weekend, helping paint, setting up social media accounts, creating a coming soon campaign that somehow attracted 1,200 followers before we'd even opened. Grandma, people are excited, she said, showing me her phone. Look at these comments. They remember Eleanor's from the 1950s, or their parents do. One comment stood out. My grandmother worked at the original Eleanor's. She said it was the best food in Charleston, but it closed too soon. Can't wait to see the revival. Revival, the word stuck with me. My ex-husband Richard called in mid-February. Helen, I heard you're actually doing this. The restaurant. Yes, I've been thinking. I could help, not financially, but advice. I know people. Richard, I appreciate the offer, but no. You're being stubborn, he said, that old familiar tone of patient exasperation. This is a bad idea. You're risking everything. I'm not risking everything, I corrected. I'm risking money I chose to invest in myself. There's a difference. After he hung up, James found me standing in the kitchen, hands shaking. You okay, boss? He asked gently. Everyone thinks I'm crazy. Everyone thought your mother was crazy too, he said. Did you know I met her once? In 1956, I was 17, working as a busboy at another restaurant. I came here on my night off because I'd heard about this woman cooking food that made people feel things. I looked up, surprised. Eleanor served me herself, James continued. Wouldn't let me pay. She said young people who loved food deserved to taste it properly. I've never forgotten that meal. Or her kindness. Why didn't you tell me this when I hired you? I wanted you to hire me for my skills, not sentiment, he said. But now I'm telling you, your mother was special. And you are too. Not because you're her daughter, but because you had the courage to start when everyone said it was too late. The opening was set for March 15th. Emma created invitations that went viral, elegant, vintage-inspired, promising Eleanor's returns, a 1956 legend reimagined. We'd received reservation requests for 6 weeks in advance. Patricia reviewed final numbers. You're cutting it close, she said. Very close. But if you can sustain an average table occupancy of 75% for the first 2 months, you'll make it. If, the night before opening, I stood alone in the restaurant at midnight, everything was ready, tables set, kitchen prepped, menu printed on cardstock that echoed Mother's original design. I pulled out her journal and wrote, "Opening night tomorrow, 12 tables." Terrified. "Mom, I hope I make you proud." March 15th dawned clear and cool, perfect Charleston weather. I arrived at Eleanor's at a.m., unable to sleep. James was already there, prepping ingredients, with the calm efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. "Ready?" he asked. "No," I said honestly, "but we're doing it anyway." By p.m., when we opened for our first seating, my hands had stopped shaking. We had reservations for all 12 tables plus a wait list. Emma was there, dressed professionally, manning our small hostess stand. Caroline and Rebecca came, bringing their families, occupying the largest table, looking proud and nervous in equal measure. The first order came in, she crab soup, shrimp and grits, pecan-crusted catfish. Mother's recipes. My execution. James and I worked in synchronized silence, the kitchen alive with heat and motion and focus. This was what I'd been practicing for months, translating recipes from cards to plates, maintaining quality under pressure, keeping calm when orders backed up. At 7:30 p.m., our first customer sent a message through Emma. "Compliments to the chef. This is exactly how I remember it." At 8:15, another, better than the original. By p.m., when the last table finished, I was exhausted in a way I'd never experienced. Not the tired from hosting a dinner party or managing a household, but the deep in your bones exhaustion of having created something that mattered. "How'd we do?" I asked James as we cleaned. "Solid," he said. "Few timing issues. One plate went out too hot, but overall, very solid first night." Caroline approached the kitchen, her expression unreadable. "Mom, can we talk?" My heart sank. Here it came, the gentle intervention, the concerns about sustainability, the reminder that this was a nice experiment but reality was calling. Instead, she hugged me. "That was the best meal I've had in years," she said, voice thick. "Not because you're my mother, but because it was genuinely extraordinary. I had no idea you could cook like that." "I didn't either," I admitted, "until I tried." That night, Emma posted photos on Eleanor's social media. By morning, we had 3,000 new followers and reservation requests for the next 3 months. Patricia called, excited. "Helen, the numbers from last night are good. Really good. If you can maintain this, we will," I said, surprised by my own certainty. The local food blogger, who'd come on opening night, published a review that afternoon. "Eleanor's isn't just a restaurant. Revival, it's a revelation." Helen Bradford has taken her mother's 1956 recipes and created something that honors the past, while firmly planting itself in the present. This is low country cooking with soul, precision, and a story that makes every bite taste like redemption. Redemption, another word that stuck. The first month was chaos disguised as success. We were fully booked every night, which sounds like a dream until you're actually living it. Orders backed up, equipment broke, I burned myself twice more, cut my finger once, and had a near breakdown when our fish supplier delivered late 3 days in a row. "This is normal," James kept saying. "Every restaurant goes through this. You're doing fine." But I didn't feel fine. I felt 56, exhausted, wondering if everyone had been right about this being a mistake. Then something shifted. It happened gradually, my hands learning the rhythm of the kitchen, my body adjusting to the physical demands, my mind developing the multitasking capacity required to manage a dozen things simultaneously. I hired 2 more staff, Marcus, a young line cook with real talent, and Diane, a server who'd worked Charleston restaurants for 20 years and knew how to manage difficult customers with grace. By mid-April, we'd found our groove. Not perfect, but functional. Not flawless, but genuine. The reviews kept coming, all positive. Charleston Magazine featured us in their May issue, the comeback story that will make you believe in second acts. My divorce attorney called. "Helen, I don't know if you've seen the settlement agreement, but Richard wants to renegotiate." "Renegotiate what?" "He's claiming the restaurant is technically marital property since you used settlement money to start it. He's requesting a percentage of profits. I laughed not bitterly, but with genuine amusement. Of course he is. Tell him no. He could fight this in court. Let him try, I said. I kept meticulous records. Every dollar came from my inheritance and my own post-divorce assets. He has no claim, and we both know it. She paused. You sound different, Helen. Stronger. I'm not different, I said. I'm just finally myself. Richard's claim went nowhere, as I knew it would. But the attempt revealed something. My success threatened him in a way my decades of domestic service never had. Mother's journal entry from May. Running a restaurant changes you. Not in the ways people expect. You don't become harder or more business-minded. You become more yourself, because there's no time for pretending. Emma graduated from 8th grade in June. Her graduation speech mentioned me. We could expand, Patricia said, reviewing numbers. The building next door is for lease. Knock through the wall, double your capacity. Or, James suggested, keep this intimate and open a second location. Different concept, different neighborhood. Or, Emma added, do a cookbook. Your Instagram followers keep asking. Eleanor's recipes, a grandmother's legacy reimagined. I looked at these three people, my unlikely team, and realized I was at another crossroads. Expand and risk losing the intimacy that made Eleanor special. Stay small and sustainable but limit potential. Branch into cookbooks and become something other than just a restaurant? What would Mother do? I asked aloud. James smiled. According to her journal entries, she was planning to expand. That's why she kept the building. She always meant to come back to it. I thought about Mother at 24, taking a risk. At 91, giving me permission to do the same. About myself at 56. Finally becoming the woman I'd been too afraid to be at 24, 34, 44. We expand, I said, but slowly, carefully. We keep this location exactly as it is, Eleanor's original. And we open Eleanor's table next door. Smaller menu, more experimental, a place to try new recipes. Emma immediately started sketching social media campaigns. Patricia pulled out spreadsheets. James nodded approval. One more thing, I said. I'm hiring a head chef for Eleanor's original. Someone who can run it when I'm developing Eleanor's table. I'm not trying to do everything anymore. Delegation, Patricia said approvingly. You're learning. I'm 57 now, I said. I'm allowed to be smart. The expansion took for months. We knocked through the wall, created Eleanor's table as an intimate, 8-seat chef's counter, where I could experiment with Mother's more ambitious recipes, where customers could watch the cooking process, where conversation and cuisine blended. Opening night for Eleanor's table, I served a tasting menu, 7 courses, each one based on Mother's original recipes but reimagined for contemporary palates. My daughters came, my grandchildren, Thomas, even Richard, awkward but genuine in his congratulations. But the guest who mattered most was Poppy Bellavita, Mario's granddaughter, who'd been researching her family history and discovered her great-grandfather had supplied fish to the original Eleanor's in 1956. My grandmother taught me that it's never too late to start over, she said. At 56, she opened a restaurant when everyone told her she was too old. She showed me that age is just a number, but courage is forever. I cried in the audience, not caring who saw. That summer, Eleanor's thrived. We expanded hours, added Sunday brunch, developed a small but loyal regular clientele. The financial pressure eased. We weren't wealthy, but we were sustainable. Patricia reviewed our 6-month numbers with undisguised pleasure. Helen, you've beaten the odds. Most restaurants fail in the first year. You're not just surviving, you're succeeding. We're not done yet, I said. No, she agreed. But you're well on your way. That night, I cooked Mother's Hoppin' John for staff meal. James, Marcus, Diane, and our new dishwasher Luis sat around the kitchen table, eating family style, sharing stories. This tastes like home, Luis said, his English accented but clear, like my grandmother's cooking in Colombia. Different food, same feeling. That's the goal, I said. Making people feel like they belong. October returned to Charleston, bringing tourists and cooler temperatures, and that particular golden light that makes everything feel possible. Eleanor's first anniversary was approaching. We'd not only survived, we'd thrived. The restaurant had become a neighborhood fixture, mentioned in travel guides, recommended by concierges at the historic district hotels. But success brought its own challenges. We were turning away reservations. The small space limited growth. I was working 60-hour weeks, exhausted but fulfilled. Thomas, my brother, came to dinner one evening. We'd been estranged since opening, not from conflict, but from my simply being too busy for family obligations that had once defined my calendar. "Helen, I owe you an apology," he said after his meal. "When you started this, I thought you were having a breakdown. I was wrong." "You were worried," I said. "I understand." "No, I was condescending," he corrected. "I assumed because you'd never worked that you couldn't. I assumed that being 56 meant you were finished starting things. I was completely wrong." He handed me an envelope. Inside was a check, significant amount, with a note. "Investment capital for Eleanor's expansion, if you want it. No strings attached. T." I looked at my brother. This man who'd inherited mother's house and conservative certainties, now offering me resources without judgment. "Thomas, you don't have to decide now," he said. "But Mom left me the house. She left you the dream. I got the better deal. This is just evening things out." That night, I called an emergency meeting with James, Patricia, and Emma, now my unofficial social media manager and part-time hostess. "My great-grandfather kept a diary," she said, showing me faded pages. "He wrote about your mother. Eleanor cooks like she's painting bold strokes. Unexpected colors. Everything coming together in ways you don't expect but can't imagine any other way." I read the entry, this stranger's assessment of my mother, and finally understood why she'd given me that blank journal. Not to record recipes or business decisions, but to finish the story she'd started. That night, I wrote the final entry. "Mother, I'm 57. Eleanor's is thriving. I'm expanding. I'm exhausted and fulfilled and more myself than I've ever been. You asked me to cook like you never had the courage to. I did, but more than that, I lived like you never had the permission to. Thank you for the recipes. Thank you for the building. Thank you for showing me that 67 years of wondering, what if, is too long. At 56, I stopped wondering. At 57, I'm still becoming. This is the recipe I created. Not she crab soup or shrimp and grits, but a life lived deliberately, courageously, unapologetically mine. It took 56 years to find it, but it was worth the wait, with love and no regrets. Helen,